discuss with other Afghan leaders how are we going to manage this transition. Maybe you can stay, but certainly not with the same powers that he had beforehand. We did nothing of the sort. We missed out on it. So far, there is one clear winner, the Taliban. The elections have been won by the Taliban. Today, in a BBC interview, just before me, there was this excellent gentleman called Mr. Hekmatyar, who is a serial assassin talking about the fraud in the elections and regaling in it. Now I get the feeling that Western governments are about to overlook the fraud, that they'll turn a different page. Now, how can we, if we do that, how can any Western country stand up and accuse other countries of running fraudulent elections? How can we accuse Mr. Mugabe? How can we say anything about Iran or about Kenya? Now, others will say, well, of course, Afghanistan, they're not used to democracy. This is not Sweden. But one is not trying to build Sweden in Afghanistan. We are trying to build a Nepal, a Bangladesh, a Pakistan. And if we expect, and we paid for these elections. We paid about $300 million. And there is absolutely no reason why we should sit silently by and allow the fraud to proceed. What we should have done so far, and we have already failed to do it, was to say loud and clear that we supported every effort of the ECC, of the Electoral Complaints Commission, to investigate the fraud, that we would give them every single amount of financial or logistical support. We haven't done it. Now, some people say, well, we should abide by the law, the Afghan law. What if the law is crooked, or it is being interpreted in a biased way by the electoral authorities? At the same time, having said that,
you shook up all of it. Was your whole time to talk about that. Yes.
And looking at David Richards, who did the most fantastic job when he was the head of ISAF in Afghanistan, and pity he couldn't stay longer. Let me say that I do think that time, however, is running out. I don't believe in quitting, but I think unless we get it right, and I think we probably have one single last opportunity to get it right. And we need an overarching political strategy before we decide whether to increase the number of soldiers. I'm certainly not in favor of quitting by a long shot. Now, I think that requires strong thinking and getting back to some degree to the drawing board. Now, I know that there are some politicians in Washington, and silently supported, I think, by many Europeans, who are trying to redefine success in Afghanistan. Let's give up on this idea of nation building. The Afghans will never be ruled properly. Let's simply concentrate on counter-terrorism. Aim at the Al-Qaeda figures and nothing else. I simply believe you can't fight, certainly the Taliban, and not even Al-Qaeda, unless you have the support of the Afghan people. And in order to get the support of the Afghans, you need a government that is competent, that is credible, that is legitimate, and we need provincial and local power holders, local district governors and governors who are competent and who are not corrupt. And this is the only way to ensure that the Afghans will is the only way to rekindle the hope of the Afghans. They've lost hope, pretty much as I think our own public is losing hope. So what I would suggest, and I'm sure that it's not going to happen, I might add, because I know after 40 years, I do know governments, how they operate. I suspect it won't happen, but I would think that what should happen is perhaps a recount of the 25% of the votes that the European Electoral Monitoring Mission demanded. In the meantime, the establishment of an interim administration, probably bringing all the talents around the table, an emergency administration that would conduct the country until the spring, when parliamentary elections are due, so one could do either of two things, either conduct parliamentary and presidential elections at that time, perhaps with the two front runners only, or in a different manner, agree in advance on a change in the composition of the Electoral Commission, agree in advance on the change of procedures for the elections, and if this interim administration feels that it is not going to be possible because of security to hold elections, let's then try and think of some kind of loya jirga of emergency, but where the rules of the game, where the composition of the emergency loya jirga will be agreed in advance. Thank you very much. I know that I'm getting a little less time than General Richards, but nonetheless, here it is.
Good. You are a four-star envoy, but yes. So we've gone from General Richards' cautious optimism to a radical call for something completely different from Francesca Vendrell to you, Ahmed Rashid. If we can try to look forward to the year ahead.
Well, I agree. Let me start. First, let me just say that I just want to thank Afghanaid. I've been associated with Afghanaid since the early 80s when it was first set up, and they ran a sort of one shoe operation out of Peshawar, and one of the first groups to start helping the Mujahideen inside Afghanistan. And they have a very, very long history in Afghanistan, and they've done some wonderful things and continue to do so. And thank you for, Afghanaid for organizing this. I am very adamant about the West staying committed to Afghanistan. Let me just, very briefly say that, the reason we are even discussing this 8 years after 9/11 is simply because of the failure of the Bush administration to focus on Afghanistan. We all know that. The priority given to Iraq, which sucked up all the resources and the manpower and everything that should have gone to Afghanistan, went to Iraq, unfortunately. And as Obama and other leaders have said, that was a war of choice, not a war of necessity. This is a war of necessity. Now, having been through, that period, I think in March, President Obama came up with a very coherent counterinsurgency strategy. With a strategy that, it talked about getting support of the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, bringing civilians and civilian reconstruction on par with the military, and having a military-civilian relationship so that, nation building and reconstruction could carry on, as well as the fight against the Taliban, improving the governance of the Afghan government, etc. And I don't think anyone at that point has, unfortunately, and as Francesca said, they did not visualize that there would be so much rigging in the presidential election. But what I'm trying to say here is that in March, Obama did put out a very comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy. And when I say that, it doesn't just mean military. It means as much to do with aid and development, etc. For example, the whole focus changed from, for the first time, the Americans were talking about investing in agriculture, which is actually something that Afghanaid have been talking about for a very, very long time and has been totally ignored by everyone. But, 70% of the population live in the countryside. And the only way to provide jobs is to improve farming. And, that is you're not going to set up a computer chip factory in Kabul. What you want to do is to have, So anyway, so I believe that but this strategy of Obama's, which was endorsed by NATO, supported by the Europeans, needed resources. And this whole conflict that we're seeing now in Washington and in European capitals and within NATO is all about what kind of resources to commit. Now, several things have happened since March which obviously have created problems. The first has been the rigged elections, which I won't go into. The second has been the failure to move anywhere on the regional solution. In other words, getting the neighbors going. Now, here I just want to very briefly touch on two of the major neighbors, Iran and Pakistan. Both the Americans and the Europeans have been ready to talk to Iran, I think, in a much more comprehensive manner than Bush ever was. But that dialogue has been stymied by two things. The Iranian elections, which were also a disaster, and the stepping up of the whole nuclear problem with Iran and the discovery of